This is Josh Reeves, and you're listening to the Mile High Church podcast. Hey, have you ever noticed when you let something go, it works out? That's part of the spiritual practice of The Power of Surrender, written by Coop Blackson and coming to Mile High Church to speak on April 26. In person or online, learn more at milehighchurch.org.
So this morning, we are going to go on a journey of alchemy together. An unknown author said, true alchemy lies in the transformative power of the heart, where the leaden weight of human experience is transmuted into the golden wisdom of the soul. And that is the journey that we are called to today, is to take a look at those challenges and those places in our life that bring us suffering, and to become spiritual alchemists so that those places can be transmuted into the gold of our expanded awareness, our expanded consciousness, and our expanded ability to be in the world. Alchemy is the very art of transformation. It's the transmutation of one substance into something of higher quality, something of more refined and more valuable essence. And classically, throughout time, alchemy has been all about transforming base metals into gold or silver, about breaking a substance down into its little parts and purifying those parts and then rejoining them to create something even stronger, even more powerful, and even more resilient. Spiritual or inner alchemy is all about that purification and that elevation and evolution of ourselves. It's that inner awakening, personal growth. It's that spiritual enlightenment that can also mean, when we get right down to it, the realization of our own divine nature. And it's all about using the base matter of our life. That's the good news. That will become the good news this morning. It is about using that base matter of our life. And to use an alchemical term, it's that prima materia. That prima materia, the stuff of our life that asks us to transform, that calls us to reach deeper, that encourages us to strengthen our relationship with God, with Spirit. And spiritual alchemy happens in the fire of our awareness. It happens in the fire of our awareness. When you take those challenges, those little triggers, those things that annoy you, those things that may even be the bigger events of our life, and we allow them to be invitations, to be gateways, to be portals into a deepening, to allow us to be with that materia so that it can transform us. It can transform our perception. It can transform our way of being with it. And it all comes from our ability to surrender, our ability to step into a deeper sense of acceptance. And we have to bring it into the crucible of our awareness in order for that to happen. That means that we have to be with it. We have to stay with it, and we have to be with it long enough so that it does have the power to transform us when we awaken to that which it is that within our own being, the beliefs, the patterns, the thoughts, the actions, the things that get in our way that have brought our relationship to this challenge to the forefront of our life. Eckhart Tolle says, the fire of suffering becomes the light of consciousness. So this is our call to action today. This is what we are called to do, is that we are living in a time, I believe, where we are all faced with the invitation to become spiritual alchemists. And what I mean by that is that in the midst, collectively, in the midst of the chaos or what appears in the material world of our lives, we are called to transmute at a level that we haven't maybe been called for before. And we're called to transmute fear into faith. We are called to transmute old energy and paradigms into innovative ways of being that up-level all levels of life on our planet and support it. We are called to transmute those actions, those words, those behaviors that separate and divide us into compassion, into empathy, and into a loving acceptance for ourselves and others, so that we can create more unity and more connection. One of the fiery moments in my own life involved both a literal and a figurative fire. This was about 15 years ago, and I got the call at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and I can remember distinctly. I was driving home in my car, and I answered it on the Bluetooth in my car. And an officer announcing himself as an investigator with the Jefferson County Fire Department was on the other end of the line. He said, "Miss Jazwierska?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Do you own the property at such and such in Golden?" I said, "Yes." And this was a townhome that I did own, and I had to move from because of a job transfer an hour away. So I had been renting this townhome out. And he said, when I confirmed, he said, "I'm calling because there's been a serious fire at the property." He said, "We had to enter through the roof, and we took out all the windows. And there's extensive damage. The good news is that no one was home at the time, and no one was hurt on either side of the townhomes on either side of the unit. But we're stabilizing the scene, and we're boarding up all the windows and doors as we speak, so don't come down here. There's nothing you can do. And I'll call you with more information once we've completed the investigation as to determine the cause." And that was the end of the call. And this was 5 p.m. on a Friday. And I thought, I'm not going to have more information on this for a few days. And at that time in my life, I was a single mom with 2 young girls, and I was struggling to make ends meet. And I have to say, when I hung up the phone, I had to sit in the fire of my own awareness, because what came up and what continued to come up over the next few months were all the things that were related to my own very survival, to my ability to provide for these 2 young girls, to my ability to know that I could make it in the world, and all the lack and scarcity and the things within my consciousness that were swirling around that were related to this very thing became very apparent very quickly. And I'd like to tell you that initially I stopped, dropped, and rolled in the fire of my awareness and in the fire of prayer, but I did not. I sat there and I stewed in it for a while. And over the next few months, I would be required to stew in it quite significantly. I had to get to the root causes, to the root belief systems, to the root fears. I was faced with a lot of fear, and I had to reach out to my community here at Mile High Church, to my practitioners, to my ministers. I had to reach out to friends. I had to reach out to friends that understood insurance and all of these things related to this, real estate, townhome things. I had to reach out for that help. But it was in those months that I was faced with the choice point to really get in there and to begin to transform and to transmute. And I was faced with the invitation to begin to create true abundance, sustainable abundance in my life, should I choose to take the invitation. And what I realized is that these things were up for the fire of my awareness to transmute and to transform. And eventually it all did work out okay. Several months later, and that townhome still exists today in my life, and it has become actually a transformational unit of abundance over time. However, I had to sit in all of that opportunity in order for it to get there. And it was a chain reaction of sorts. Have you experienced those things in your life where you are faced with one thing and it sets off a catalyst for greater transformation? And the biggest thing that was up for me is that I had to reach deeper in for a deeper sense of trust. I had to reach in for a deeper sense of awareness in what real abundance really meant and where it comes from. Who was my source? What was my source? Could I look beyond the material environment? And I wonder too, over time, Eckhart Tolle, to bring him back again, he talks about how you have these pain bodies that come up in your life. And when they come up in your life and they surface, initially the pain is really great when you're right there faced with it. But then over time, if you continue to work the spiritual tools and the spiritual practices, then it comes up again and you meet it. And it comes up again and you meet it. And over time, it comes up again, and eventually you see it come up, and you watch it collapse back down. And you begin to feel a sense of freedom, and it gets reabsorbed into your very own consciousness. And that's the power of being a spiritual alchemist, is that we take these challenges in our life and the way that we view them as they become those invitations for the fire of our awareness, and that over time, they become absorbed back until we eventually touch what in Hinduism is called the very ground of our being. Meaning that we awaken to that deeper sense of connection and experience of the divine within us. So I wonder if you have those experiences in your life right now. I think we all are given a few theme songs, for this life, right? There's a few that play over and over again. Maybe it is your relationship with abundance. Maybe it's your relationship with other people. Maybe it's your relationship with health. But we have these theme songs, and they play again and again until we are able to reach deeper and form a compassion and an acceptance and a deeper looking into these things, allowing them so that transmutation can really take root. Mark Nepo, in his book, Things That Join the Sea and Sky, captures it so beautifully in his writing entitled Catching Fire. He says, one day, quite by accident, we set aflame the false selves we've tried on, and we hold each other to the heat until the illusions we've carried start to burn. In time, if blessed, we simmer into the lake of beauty we all came from. I sensed this when burning up, he says, the instant you pulled me from the fire of my own making. So what are you called to alchemize in your life this morning? What is presently up for transmutation? What is life bringing you in the ways of challenge right now, in the ways of perhaps even greater suffering? That is a deeper call for you to deepen in. And I want to share this morning 3 possible alchemical principles that can support us in this process of spiritual alchemy. And the first alchemical principle is integration. And it is the alchemy of integration. It has to do with our ability to hone our spiritual fortification through our spiritual practices and our soul stamina through our spiritual practices so that we can, and we've all heard this over and over again, be in the world but not of it. We are called not to hide, to go away in a cave, although I love doing that, don't get me wrong. I like to scurry away and be in a cave, but we are called to be in the presence of whatever is swirling about in the material world right now. And that is the call of the spiritual alchemist, is to make sure that we are so anchored in love, we are so anchored in our awareness, in our connection with the divine, that when all that stuff comes up, we can stand in it. We can be with it, and we can be a beneficial presence right in the midst of it. Mircea Eliade, he's a renowned historian of religion. He wrote extensively on the sacred and the role of symbols and rituals in accessing the sacred. He said, ritual is a way of experiencing the world as meaningful. By means of repeated enactments of myth and archetypes, participants in ritual find themselves connected with the cosmos and with the sacred. So he's presenting us with an idea right here that what are the rituals that you have in your life that you do on a daily basis? It may or may not look like an actual spiritual practice. It may not look exactly like sitting on your meditation cushion, although that's all wonderful too. It may look like how you infuse the mundane of your day-to-day with a spiritual perspective. In Celtic spirituality, back in the day, they would make the bed and sing the prayers. They would tend the fire and pray along with it. They would sing the hymns. They would waken themselves in the midst of what they were called to do. And maybe for some of you, it is doing the dishes. And if it is, please come see me after service because I need some help with that. Seeing it as a spiritual practice. Although it can be, right? It's those things that call us into a into a sense of the sacred. And we can do it every single day, built into what it is that we're doing. I know for myself, one of the greatest rituals that I have is to sit in a dark room. Yes, it has to be dark. And to have a spotlight upon a piece of contemplative text, and to have a cup of tea, and to move beyond space and time in that moment, to allow that sense of the sacred to awaken within me. That's a daily ritual that I have. But maybe for you, it's while you're driving your car. Or maybe it is when you are taking out the trash. Whatever it is, those rituals are the gateways and the portals. They are the bridges between the mundane and the sacred. And it's up to us to fortify those, to build those. Magic, right? So we use our spiritual practice to fortify these bridges and to presently blend in and become a broadcasting station for the divine in the midst of whatever we find ourselves out in the world. To use an artistic term, it's about feathering the lines between the mundane and the sacred. And so we become these spiritual cells of light in the midst of chaos. The spiritual alchemist, guards against the outside world and the material perspective coming first and foremost. But we are conditioned. We're conditioned to look at the outside before we look at the inside. But what happens is that over time we become so hypnotized, so mesmerized by the outside world have you ever tried to make a decision and you have all that swirling around within you and all you can hear are the voices of social media in your head or maybe your friends, your family members or other significant others, and you can't really get to what it is that's happening within yourself because that connection has been lost a bit. So the spiritual alchemist can use these rituals. Maybe for you it's a walk in nature, but they are the reminders and the catalysts to rehearse the spiritual principles. And another part of that is to use a symbol, perhaps, to anchor yourself in that awareness. One of those such symbols for me that I think is so beautiful and is full of sacred geometry is the symbol of the Vesica Pisces, which you're going to see a picture of right up here on the screen. This beautiful example. And this symbol throughout all faiths carries similar meaning. And what it can stand for the union of the masculine and the feminine energies within us. It can also stand for, being a seed shape of the universe. This is a seed shape that is found in the flower of life, which means that mathematically this ratio is found throughout all of creation at the very base form. So this symbol can represent the holy intersection of the spiritual parts of ourselves with the physical, material part of ourselves. What if this very symbol was placed all over so that I can see it every day and that every time I look at it, I'm like, I am the unification of the mundane and the sacred in action. I am a limitless being, and this reminds me of that when I see it. From Judaism, the menorah is shaped after the shape of an almond tree. And the very center of this looks like the shape of an almond, which also has another meaning, the mandorla. And that is the shape that you see there. You know, in Christianity, it represented the womb of Mary from which Yeshua, from which Jesus came forth, and was also the symbol of the unification of earth and heaven, or as above, so below. In Islam, it's the womb of the universe. And so this symbol can stand for the alchemy that happens when we're able to be with very, very real world challenge, very real life challenges, and access the spiritual in the midst of it. Look above you. And for those of you online, use your imagination. But this very symbol is right there, right here in our sanctuary, reminding us of that intersection of the spiritual and the mundane in each one of us. So we embody these symbols with art. And so I close this particular point with a charge, with an invitation to all of you. It comes from Friedrich Nietzsche. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. What happens if you look at your life like that? This chaos allows me the invitation to give birth to a dancing star. The greater is going to come forth through me as a result of this. I will stick with it. I will stay with it. I will allow it to transmute me in love, with love. So we stand in the chaos long enough to harvest the gold of it. That brings us to the second part, which is the alchemy of mystical vision. We are called as spiritual alchemists to transmute our perception of the world, to our perception of how we relate to and view the world around us. And that means that we can set the intention as spiritual alchemists to look beyond the material surface of things to the deeper meaning. We may not always understand it. We may not always see exactly the big picture. We are in a human form. We are in a human perspective. However, we do know, we can trust that there is a greater mystery at work here. Just look up at the night sky to see that. You know, we can trust that the divine nature is found when we look deep enough. And that includes both within ourselves and with others. You are a timeless being made in the likeness of spirit. And as a spiritual alchemist, you can access the timeless in order to know that again and again and again. Recently, I went on a field trip to the Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, right down here on Colfax, on the corner of Logan and Colfax. And I love to go to cathedrals because for me, they awaken within me that sense of all sorts of stuff. But anyway, they awaken within me the sense of the divine and the beauty that's found in the stained glass. And so I took in all of the stained glass, and as I was about to leave the building, right in the way back corner above the restrooms was this stained glass that you're going to see up there. And there it is, the eye of the all-seeing divine, right back above the restrooms. Excellent. Yeah. But what I took from the meaning of that was twofold. The first thing that I took is that, yes, we are always being held in the eyes of the divine. At the depth of our being is that divine nature, that timelessness, that perfection of our beingness, the ground of our being. And number two is that we can adopt that way of seeing in the world. You know, maybe we're called to do this through prayer, through our spiritual mind treatments in order to shift our seeing, to get to that deeper spiritual meaning. But what I do know is that Ernest Holmes wrote extensively about the way that we view ourselves and others. He encouraged us again and again to look beyond the worldly view of things. He said, we must understand that we have to rise above much of the world's confused thought. The world has dropped its eyes to the ground. Hungry for much, it is satisfied with little. Therefore, we must strike out for the heights, away from the mists and fogs of human doubts, and we must see things through the eyes of spirit. New Thought teacher Emma Curtis Hopkins, in her book High Mysticism, talks about celestial seeing, that we turn our view again and again. We return again and again through our spiritual practice, through our spiritual awakening, to know, to look out with eyes of the divine. Do you remember the first time that you laid eyes upon someone that you love? Maybe it was a newborn. Maybe it was a beloved partner. Maybe it was a beloved friend. Maybe it was a beloved in your family. But the first time that you made that connection and that lens of love was so strong, so pure, so innocent, and so loving. How were you seeing in that moment? How were you communicating in that moment? Perhaps live with these questions for a while to see if they can awaken that divine perspective. What would it be like if we looked with the lens of love next time we find ourselves in a disagreement or in the midst of conflict? And what if we could breathe? What if we could pause? And what if we could reach deeply in to connect with that sense of seeing through the lens of love? In some indigenous tribes of Africa, they encourage this deep looking as if for the first time. So Bonfu Somé, in her book, The Spirit of Intimacy, Ancient African Teachings on the Ways of Relationships, says that in her Dagara tribe in West Africa, they made it a practice to look at conflict through the lens of wonder, as an invitation to meet it with curiosity as if for the first time. She says, when we find problems arise, we tend to forget about the foundation we've built the relationship upon. But it can be helpful to go back and to consider the time when we came together, when Spirit brought us together, to remember the lens of love that when we felt so closest and we felt so strongest together, and to draw from that frame of reference into the present moments to look at our problems from that angle. So next time we meet conflict, when it's knocking at our door in the world, it can be so hard in the heat of the moment. I totally get that. But next time we meet that conflict, perhaps we pause and we breathe and we see, can I even look at through the lens of love within my very own self? Can I connect with that and have compassion right here? So then I can maybe share it out there. So here's our charge for this one, is, as Gabrielle Bernstein writes in her book, Judgment Detox, to see as if the first time is to look to and from the heart. So we have to begin to see from within here so that we can begin to see out here. And that brings us to our final point this morning, which is the alchemy of the heart. You know, as I was putting this together, it kept going through my mind again and again. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And so it's all the stuff, the blocks, the grievances, the things that are in the way, the stuff we haven't forgiven yet. All that stuff gets in the way of us being able to look out with the lens in love. So it is our own responsibility as spiritual alchemists especially to move, to deal with those things so that there is more of us to connect. And so just as this might represent the seeing, the mystical vision, the Vesica Pisces, then we also have to awaken this seeing within from here in our heart. And some of you may have been to Europe. When you go to Europe, you see these statues standing around. You'll see one of Saint Denis right up here, Denise. And, they're holding their heads in their hands. And, some of the time you're looking at that going, did they just glue it in the wrong place? They just couldn't get up there? They couldn't get it back on the top of their head? I don't know. But, what I think what really it's asking or is symbolizing is that we need to remove the thinking so that we can get to this deeper feeling, right? And you remember in Alice in Wonderland where the Queen of Hearts, that's a clue, says off with their heads? It's because we have to move from here into here if we're going to open the eyes of our heart to be able to see. And so I'm going to close today with this essence of heart math, from the Research Institution of Heart Math, where they've done this research. And their director of research, Roland McCrathie, he tells this story in the movie The Power of the Heart, which I highly recommend a look. But in this movie, he talks about how they've done this research where they'd sit people down and they connect these electrodes to their head and to their heart, and they would hook them up to these computer screens. And then on these screens, they would flash either a high arousal picture or an arousal picture, meaning that it was very disturbing in some way, maybe a car crash or something very emotionally charged. And then they would alternate that, or they would randomly mix it up with another image of something very calming, like a view of nature. And what they found over time, after 30 or so repetitions of this, is that people's heart rate would drop before those more significant, more challenging images would appear. And they didn't even know it showed, and they were flabbergasted with this information. And it's been repeated by many institutes over and over again, is that the heart somehow has an intuition before it even would show up on the screen. And so what that said is that the communication in ourselves, it goes heart, who sends a message to the mind, which sends a message to the body. The heart carries this power of intuition, and that comes from opening ourselves, opening our hearts so that we're able to see from that space. Recently, I've been immersed in the studies of Gnosticism in preparation for this class that's coming up, this interfaith class, and it's so very beautiful. The early Gnostics had these traditions that they would repeat over and over again so that you could have a direct experience of God. What they would say, and then that would awaken within you gnosis, which is knowing with a capital N, knowing your divine nature. And I want to close today with this beautiful quote by Dr. Stephen Haller from the Gnosticism book. He says, "We may view the dark vault above us as a perforated veil, through the small holes of which the light of the ultimate reality penetrates our vision. Through the holes, through the cracks in the universe, a transcendental luminosity enters our consciousness." A transcendental luminosity enters our consciousness. This light is the light of gnosis. It awakens us to possibilities long desired but not yet realized. Light calls to light. The lid that seals in our universe is lifted, and we behold the vast ocean of boundless light of which we are temporarily exiled sparks. Every single one of us is a divine spark of the divine. And it is through our spiritual alchemy that we awaken that deeper gnosis, that deeper knowing of the divine spark within. And so I'd invite you, as we move within, we're going to close with a little meditation and prayer as I play the alchemy crystal bowls. And we just move into that space of our heart right now, allowing the sound vibrations to wash over. And as we connect in our heart, this crucible of the heart, I invite you to bring any challenge of your life, any sense of suffering that might be up for you right now, right into that space, so that the fire of love, the fire of the heart, can transmute, transform, absorb, hold with compassion, with love, with light. We set our intentions this morning, knowing that every challenge of our life is an invitation to bring us deeper into the relationship with the divine, deeper in love. And this morning I know that as we gather in prayer, that the very prayer is that we awaken to the divine spark within, knowing that that spark is the elixir of our consciousness. That spark is the truth of our being. And that spark is love. So it is in the essence of love that we release this prayer this morning, releasing it into that alchemy of love and law, feeling and knowing, absolutely feeling that it is done, and we allow it to be. We step aside and we allow Spirit.
Thanks for listening to the Mile High Church podcast. This podcast is made possible by the generous contributions from listeners like you. To make a donation, please visit milehighchurch.org.